Today's News Talk Radio.
I do a lot of streaming radio.
I do a lot of free streaming.
TNTRadio.live.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back. We're in the final segment of the final hour here of this live broadcast. I want to bring on to the program our research assistant for the show. Kristian James is joining us from the United Kingdom. Kristian, how are you doing, by the way? How's the weather?
The weather right now is rather interesting, actually. If you were to look across the red top newspapers, or you were to look at the Daily Express or any of the kind of news blurbs right now, they're all talking about how the weather is so bad right now. It's so terrible. We're facing like a new meta snowstorm I saw this morning. I had no idea what that classification is. But
what's it called now? Is this a new term? A meta snowstorm?
A meta snowstorm, yeah. Not mega. They're going for another level. This is meta snowstorm.
So we've had polar vortex, the beast from the east. Do you remember the beast from the east?
I do. I'm 2 and 3.
and now it's the meta snowstorm.
Yeah, the Arctic snow blast and all these kind of like buzzwords designed to drive fear into people. I did actually on a related note to that, I saw NOAA, the weather survey company. They're just about to launch what they call the F6 classification for storms, that actually begins next week. So they've gone from, when it comes to categories and storms, you have like the F1 or F0 actually to F5, and they're about to add an F6 to that because they think over the next 10 years there's going to be an exacerbation of storm out there, so they need to add a new classification to that. And I think what might happen is they're just going to condense down the other ones really and add another one in there, so that the shock and the awe value, because already the storms already have names on them, designed to make us feel personalized to them, that they're personally coming in for the attack. And you mentioned the beast from the east. I mean, if you can remember, that was like 2017, 18, and that was kind of the Russia spin in the media, and that just added to that. And it was kind of like Russia are sending us modified weather, as the Daily Express, and that whole panic designed to just terrorize people across England. It was awful. They had
big giant cooling fans they erected over just west of Moscow, and they were just blowing that cold Siberian weather into Europe in order to traumatize residents in Europe, and of course the UK getting the tail end of the beast from the east, and it seemed to work a charm. The tabloids loved it, so yeah, I guess it might as well be real, because people get freaked out by it. So weaponizing of the weather, this is all part of the psychological conditioning around green policies, the Green New Deal, all things green, saving the environment, stopping man-made global warming, etc. And on the energy front, it's not really adding up, is it? The sums on this. Wind energy really as well.
Patrick. No, they're really not, Patrick. So in the UK right now, particularly, so there was a certain point last week actually where more than 60% of the UK's power was actually driven entirely by the wind. As happily ties into the wind story. But the wind has actually grabbed the headlines over the last couple of days in a very different angle. Of course, multi-billion corporation owned by Jeff Bezos, Amazon, has purchased a large... Well, actually, in 2001, they made the purchase, actually, for what would be the massive wind farm rollout across the Moray wind farm, which is located off northwest Scotland. So now Amazon has bought into that even more so. They've now bought a 70% stake in that company. And... So it was driven by green policies. This was to happen. So they were subsidised by the UK government to say, "Hey, this is going to help support our green initiatives, our green programs, our environmental push towards net zero." But it seems that Amazon really have done this for themselves because they want to power up their own equipment using their own wind farms. So actually, this is not to supply the government, although I guess they will power the grid and will obviously get a kickback out of that. But really, it's to prioritize their own initiatives and own hardware here in the UK and infrastructure. So this was originally designed as a bit of a positive spin on what would be the wind farm and the initiatives behind that. But it's now being seen as a bit of a power grab, and it appears that the government has just clicked onto this. The papers have now run with this story going, hey, wait a minute, you've got all this power over there, and you're giving it to what effectively is Amazon. what are we doing about it? How have they been allowed to do that? So the committees for the energy and the net zero committee have been speaking about this over the last couple of days because they now realise ultimately they've been hoodwinked. That they're going to take the money effectively and the energy for themselves entirely. But they're not the only company to do this, because Google also did this a little while back in 2022. They've got a wind farm obviously located off the south of England. So we're now seeing this kind of monopolization of big corporations buying in now to the energy sector. I mean, they haven't done that before. This is relatively new, but this kind of the way I first saw this, I was like, wait a minute, we know what Bill Gates has been up to in the United States with a massive land grab, which has moved into his portfolio. We're now seeing other big corporations, certainly the big well-known ones, Google, Amazon, now buying into the power industry. Is this more of a consolidation of power towards certain groups and organizations? And will we potentially at one point, perhaps not soon in the future, but far in the future, they may effectively eventually own all the power in a certain region, and you will perhaps see conflicts between intercorporation, the kind of thing we've seen in science fiction over the last 50 years. But you kind of see those plants now happening, energy sector being driven by these big mega corporations. Or is that something we're going to be going into? I don't know, but it certainly appears to be that way.
Well, what's interesting that you bring this up, Kristian, because I think there's something else at play here. And look at what happened in Europe with Germany. As soon as the sanctions came and they cut off Russian gas effectively from Europe, Germany was the first to suffer. And who suffered the most was German industry. So companies like BASF, Volkswagen, Siemens, they basically pulled up stakes, left to China, to the United States, to set up where there's cheaper overheads. And why was that? The biggest overhead that they couldn't stomach was the cost of energy, plus the availability of energy. So they needed a steady stream at a fixed cost, because they can't run their business on this sort of 400% fluctuations on the spot market every couple of weeks, depending on what the foreign policy is coming out of Washington. So what I see happening here is big companies that have the resources, they're like, no, we're going to basically buy our energy direct. We're gonna have our own little grid. We'll have a fixed cost. We will buy that as it gets pulled onto the grid anyway, but that allocation they'll be able to fix their own price on. So I can see companies like Amazon doing this, and some of the big the Googles. They're the only ones who can really afford to do this. So they're kind of competing against the energy companies and governments in order to sort of secure their own lot. The danger, Kristian, of course, is if they get into this game, like if they get into the medical care game, okay, which Amazon is getting into, then they're just basically going to consume the entire, the whole sections of the economy, because they're the ones with the cash that do it. They can these people got a tremendous leverage. A company that size, they can issue shares, they can do buybacks, they can raise capital on the backs of literally the paper that's floated on the markets. So they can do this. So I think they're shoring up their own interests first to get fixed costs for bottom lines, but that could lead to, I think, more monopolistic behavior by these companies, Kristian.
No, I think you're totally on the ball there. I think that is exactly what they're going for, is the ability to stabilize the market price for themselves, because, of course, they don't want to see them fluctuations happen. I mean, there was that situation that happened, but if it was like last year or the year before in Texas, where there was the massive snowstorm that happened there, everything got frozen, and all the power went to such a level of value that even companies, mega corporations, couldn't afford to even turn the grid on, because they ended up in a really bad situation. So I think that corporations like this don't want that to happen. I spoke to, I rather emailed a company called Renewable UK, and because they put out a news blurb getting counter to Amazon's activity in regards to this. And Nathan Bennett was the person who replied, and they said the market for renewable energy is agreements is now growing at an enormous rate. And exactly what you said there is that companies like Amazon, like Google, like Microsoft, and certainly Bill Gates are indeed buying up mass land and mass power supply, potentially for the ability for what they want to do in the future, because they want it ultimately for themselves. And their appetite is just enormous. They want to see their electricity bills and come down, but they want to do it in the guise of supporting decarbonisation.
So it's total vertical supply chain So this is the new. If you've got the means, this is the new model. Bill Gates, as you said, he's doing the sort of fake meat. So he wants all the sort of plant and cellulose bulk material to feed into that. He's buying up the land. He's probably got shares in the fertilizer business as well. Monsanto GMO business. I know he's heavily invested in that. So complete vertical supply chain domination. So that's this kind of monopolistic behavior that we're seeing. This is going to run into kind of a wall at some point with antitrust suits. It's really going to challenge basic, regulations and checks and balances that have been put in place from the turn of the 20th century, actually during the robber baron era. Kristian, that's what I see coming.
Yeah, for sure. So in the notes, so here, so Amazon has like multiple sites in the UK. It's got Cambridge, Edinburgh, Swansea, London. It has corporate offices in Manchester. It has not only just data centers, but it has these distribution centers. I mean, ultimately, they want to be able to shore that power for themselves here. And I guess if you take a big grab of the energy sector in the UK, you've got that. I mean, well, actually, as you know, one of the articles obviously wrote for 21st Century a while back was about the energy situation and what we face in the UK as a challenge. We still drag, 6 to 10 gigawatts a day off the continent. We're not energy sufficient in this country yet. And that perhaps is not going to happen if we... our power supply and our nuclear power supplies, these structures and these factories that haven't been built yet, what should have come online in 2025, 2026, that are not going to happen, that have been kicked back now to 2029. I mean, maybe this will be a saving grace for the government, but now you potentially have you have corporate interests now locked into government requirements. I mean, so they can actually sway in a very different way. They can have a full monopoly here because the government needs the energy. They have the ability to sell it to the government, therefore, at a higher price. So that might well happen on the back burner to this, as well as adding to their green credentials that they could sell it at.
This is unbridled capitalism in its rawest and most massive form. I mean, so like food supply, I know you know a little bit about this business as well. Big supermarket chains have also got into that, vertical supply chain domination, buying up whole sort of farm operations and leasing out, their tenancy agreements with the farmers that used to own those farms, still working, having turned around working, become effectively employees for some of these big, massive food retailers like Tesco, for instance. And they're just kind of caught in this kind of indentured servitude, almost like sharecropper sort of economy, their rentier economy. So, those big conglomerates, they could get into the energy business as well. I'm sure they're already they're into the food supply. They're also into probably other things in terms of organophosphates and, the fertilizer side and the energy side, maybe.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So in the UK, we have at least 3 of the major supermarkets actually also have their own bank. So Sainsbury's Bank, Tesco has a bank. Asda, I'm not sure Asda has a bank, but they all operate and they are their own bank. They're not subletting, off an account to like Barclays or whatever. That is actually their own banking sector. So effectively, they're lending money to themselves in a really nice way to shore up, great profits. And like you said, they're buying into the fertilizer industry. They're buying into the agriculture industry. So if you go into a Tesco in the UK, you'll find there's always like these banner ads saying, "Look at our farmers here; they're all wonderful." Although the farmers, of course, have a very different story to that because they're getting driven down on cost and price and profit to the point where many of them, of course, are facing, walking away from the farming industry entirely. And there's terrible stories what are coming out regarding their own mental health, their own workability, and the challenges that they're facing on a day-to-day basis. But you mentioned soil there. You mentioned Monsanto. This was a story I shared to you a few weeks ago, and there's certainly some developments in this that is worth going into. Whether you wanted to roll this on after the break or not. So we saw. So Bayer has Monsanto. They fused together in 2018, and they dropped the Monsanto because, of course, the negative connotations that has. So now it's just Bayer. So part of the plan, shall we say, potentially, is that they have rolled into genetically modified soil, and their role now, what was, of course, they were once in the bioweapon industry, they were once in the bioagriculture industry. Now they want to potentially move forward by having a solution regarding the nitrate damaged soil and the low soil quality that's now happening because we've been degrading it over such time. And actually, the reason why the farmers are angry is the way that they are. Because, of course, the environmental policies are we need the soil to be healthy. We need it to be fertile again. And using nitrates and ammonia is damaging them. That is true. So we have Bayer, the world's biggest pharmaceutical company and of industry and agriculture, now moving into that very sector. And they want to produce now biosoils. So now, beyond the article that I shared to you that came out of Uncut, it's actually really quite a good article. And the fears they have, even within their own network and their own internal communications, have already been leaked already about the worry about how they're going to handle what happens when the soil starts leaching into other adjacent farms. How will the builds work? Because I don't know if you remember, Patrick. So Monsanto famously, when it was using Roundup, which of course is their pesticide, it worked in tandem with their growth of seeds. So the idea is that the seeds was protected from Roundup, the Roundup was protected from the seeds, so that you could use the pesticide and the crop would still grow healthily. But what was happening, of course, was the seeds were being shared to other farms that are nearby, and then Monsanto was actually going after those farms for using their effectively copyright patented stock. So this worry now is that, of course, if this happens with genetically modified soil, this potentially has a legality and a legislation issue kicking down the road, potentially where you see farms potentially using soy, using fertilizer that might well be copyrighted, shall we say, patented by an adjacent farm and company. So there's a big risk around this. So I saw that Euroactiv did a really good article on this. They were talking about it in regards to an article that happened in the European Parliament yesterday. So the European Parliament discussed this. They have now renamed genetically modified soils to have the new terminology of NGT. And I think everyone should keep an eye on this. This is new genomic NGT, so new genomic technologies. So they voted 307 in favor against 263 to move across with it, to move into these NGT, these genetically modified soils. So multiple parties and multiple groups within the MEPs clearly like it and dislike it. They clearly are issues going on here. The idea is that they've rebranded it because they doesn't want the negative connotations going on. So they have renamed them NGT1 and NGT2. The first one is gene-edited plants that are indistinguishable from conventional breeding and natural agriculture process. And the NGT2 would be genetically modified complex built from the ground up to be resistant to soil. So they now want to roll these out across Europe as a plan. So there's a commission proposal. However, the proposal is that currently, when it comes to mandatory labeling, they cannot be labeled as genetically modified or NGT. Only the seeds will be labeled as that. So farmers can buy NGT seeds and NGT plants. They would not know whether they are natural, organic, or modified. So that runs into a hard line there. So the MEPs are currently debating this. So I think if you are in contact with any European members of Parliament, it is definitely worth keeping this conversation on the ball. They had a big discussion about it yesterday. It is they're juggling it. They don't know what they're going to be doing, whether they're actually going to be moving forward with actually using the stock, using the products, but certainly the labeling has been discussed and how that we move forward. I mean, and their discussions really are coming out of the soil is damaged. We need to move forward with this. This is what the farmers are talking about. This needs to happen, and then they're pressuring this to happen by the second week of February to decide how this will roll out across the European continent. So I will drop a link in there because this dropped yesterday, and I was like, this is exactly on the ball for what we're discussing. So let me just drop that in everyone's chat box on here. The European Parliament.
So they're rebranding GMO. They're rebranding GMO because GMOs are just a damaged brand. It's been completely, destroyed many times over. It's been ravaged by activists and people like that. So by rebranding it, it's amazing. NGT1, NGT2, they get people arguing between 1 and 2. So this is just a total gaslighting operation here by industry. I mean, So I hope the activist community that's been opposing, rightfully so, the proliferation of genetically modified organisms into our food supply, that they're getting wise on this and going to be able to sort of counteract this propaganda, because that's all it is. This is just corporate propaganda.
Yeah, for sure. So Bayer's moving forward with its own soil micro modification, as it's calling it. So they want to enter. What does it mean? So it's not Bayer as such. It's actually subcontracted to a company called Ginkgo Bioworks, and they're based out of Holland. So, and again, their own reports are that what will happen is if it enters the food supply, they don't know, and on the link that I'll post into the chat now, which I've just posted in there from Uncut News, is an internal memo that got leaked, and they were really worried that there's going to be unintended consequences to live, natural, and organic foods if how the soil will interact with wild species, and how that will be legislated when it comes to if the crop gets out there, who owns what and how will it work? Because ultimately they haven't patented it yet, so it doesn't have a patent. So when that happens, I mean, they're going to be all over this, and certainly the big corporations are going to be wanting to hammer that home. As such, the European Union Parliament doesn't want to patent it as such, and that will be up for discussion this week. So if you are watching this,
go give that a shout out. How people could possibly voice their objection to this, Kristian.
Yes, to my understanding, so the European Parliament does air all its stuff live, and MEPs are contactable. I mean, ultimately, they are going to be voting on this. They are going to be discussing it, and they're. I mean, that's at 307 to 269 vote is pretty close. I mean, that has swung it in regards to holding off on doing more research into it. But ultimately, we need to swing that 307 back the other way and say this is something we should not be doing as yet, despite the fact that potentially it might be the way out of this current crisis.
Well, there's also something you said about government getting in and backing and supporting the organic farming sector, which they never really have done properly. We posted a really good piece by Julian Rose on 21st Century Wire, and he's kind of very much on the front lines of the Polish farmer protests, which are kicking off tomorrow, February 9th, all across the country. And if anyone doesn't know, Poland is an agricultural powerhouse in Europe. They're one of the biggest agriculture producers in Europe, and they're up in arms over all of these policies that are affecting all these people in France, Holland, etc. Poland has their own problems with cheap, substandard, and low-quality Ukrainian goods that are being dumped on the market there. That's just one issue, I think. But it's also the organic issue. Julian Rose, who we've had on the program before, to talk about other issues. But we have published his piece up at 21 Wire, and he really makes the appeal here that we need to get back to common sense, traditional farming methods, and that these are, in the long term, more prosperous and more profitable for local communities. Maybe not at the corporate transnational level, but they are very successful for the community and for countries as individual countries. So I hope that unfortunately, Kristian, a lot of lobbying goes on in Brussels. So all these things that you're talking about here, there's some big interests, big money lobbying for this in Brussels and in Washington too. There's two things I'll say real quick and we'll go to break. But with food, there's the minerals that the vegetables take from the soil. Those are being depleted. That's the real problem, actually. And the other is bacteria. Bacteria is good. That's what makes soil work. This is what makes seeds germinate. They're wanting to sterilize this whole process. And if we don't get those good bacterias and minerals, then our guts for our GI tracts as humans consuming the food are not going to be in good health either. So I think they've got the whole thing wrong. They've had it wrong from the beginning, and they continue to get it wrong, Kristian. They're just getting it wrong on a much bigger level now. That's quite frightening. You talk about GM soil. I mean, goodness gracious, unbelievable stuff. But look, we're going to go to break in a minute. Your final thoughts, Kristian. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think the idea of synthetic soil obviously opens a whole can of worms, or perhaps might even fund the worms. Obviously, worms, they feed off the minerals in the bacteria that's in the ground. So yeah, I think we all need to keep an eye on this, because it's at the crux of the farmers' conflict, and this is now about to roll out. I find that to be very suspicious in terms of its timing. That's all.
No, definitely. I appreciate you bringing this very important story, Kristian, to everybody's attention. I think people need to get active on this really quick because things are moving fast. We're also going to bring, hopefully, Julian Rose, who is a pioneer in organic farming, one of the leading pioneers, in fact, in the UK. He was recognized by the establishment even for that many years ago with the title of Sir Julian Rose for his great work in agriculture. He will get him on the program to talk about this as the Polish farming protests kick off tomorrow in Central Europe. But Kristian James, our research assistant for the show, as always, we really appreciate you and the work that you're doing.
No, thank you very much. I've dropped those links into the TNT chat, so hopefully people can get aware of what the situation is and what's going on. So, thank you very much.
Yeah, get that information and share it. Thank you, Kristian, for dropping that in there, and also a big thank you to our other guests, Basil Valentine, our correspondent in the second hour with that great Middle East update and commentary on the latest there, and of course in the first hour, Michael Tracy, a fantastic journalist from the United States. Michael's take on the 2024 election, the Tucker Carlson Putin interview. That's live on X today. Twitter, 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 11 p.m. UK time. Tune into X Twitter, follow Tucker Carlson, and watch this bombshell interview that everybody is going to be watching. I guarantee it. Listen, that's all we've got time for today. Really appreciate you guys joining us, our TNT chat community as well. We love you guys, all of our listeners, all of our viewers. We'll be signing off today, but we'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place, with a slightly different program. Scheduled program as well. Hope to see you guys all there. Take care, everybody. All the best. I'm Patrick Henningsen, your host, signing out.